हेलो दोस्तों, हेलो फ्रेंड्स। आज से मेरे यूट्यूब चैनल में एक नई इनिंग की शुरुआत हो रही है। आई एम गोइंग टू स्टार्ट अ न्यू इनिंग इन दिस यूट्यूब चैनल बिकॉज आई एम गोइंग टू चेंज माई tangent a bit. Lot of finance, lot of stock market discussion from me, isn't it? But now I've decided that let us take our learning to the next level. Let us move up and talk about other aspects of life which are equally important, not just about finance and investing. As part of OMG series, you know what I'm doing? I'm trying to connect with as many my network and experts in various domains to come and talk about their domain. We started first with trading psychology. Then we did recently with Rahul on Insurance 101, where he explained us everything about insurance, which all of us should know. Today, I have a special guest, and I'm going to speak in English because the guest is also going to speak in English. So we're going to go slow so that people who don't understand English, अगर आप English नहीं समझते तो हम धीरे धीरे जाएंगे ताकि आप समझ पाएं. Because today's topic is so important, extremely important. We are going to talk about cancer today. And this video is going to be, I believe, a benchmark video for all Indian households who want to understand this particular disease. Cancer 101. This discussion will be with one of my family friends. I will call him Bhaiya. And he is in UK. He has been practicing there. And we'll know more about him from him himself. And he's closely right now helping us in treating one of my family member. In fact, he's guiding us to fight with that pathetic disease, cancer. So we're going to learn a lot about cancer from our guest today. His name is Roshan. Roshan Bhaiya, hello.
Hi.
So good to see you.
Good to see you too, Vivek. And thank you for asking me to take part in your video.
Thank you so much. I am so glad that you're the first one who is helping me to change the tangent of this channel. And I'm sure that this will add so much value to typical Indian household who's literally struggling at this moment with this disease. I don't know about the global standards. We're going to talk about UK and other places, what is happening there. But India, definitely now it has become a household name. And we talk about anyone, he say that मेरा ये relative के भी cancer हो रखा है. But before we talk about that, this is my format. I want to know about you. My audience, my learners want to know about you. So please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Vivek. My background really started with medical school in the UK. So I studied there, and then, like you say, at that time in the 90s, cancer was becoming the growing problem. We had seen that epidemic of heart disease, but at that time we were starting to see that there were some treatments starting to emerge. We discovered some treatments for heart attacks and things. So I felt that the next challenge was going to be cancer. So I decided I would specialize in that area. And to that end, I went to Imperial College. I did my medical training there. Then I went to the Royal Marsden Hospital, which is UK's #1 cancer hospital. I then did my PhD in ovarian cancer at the Institute of Cancer Research before moving to the United States to work at the MD Anderson for a few years before coming back to Imperial College. I was then running my own lab, doing clinical work and clinical trials. But over the last few years, I've focused mainly on doing clinical work and clinical trials.
Okay.
And less on the laboratory side of things. And, this has been a really exciting period of time in terms of cancer, because I remember when I first started, there was a lot of pessimism around cancer and its treatment. And we are now seeing a real revolution in cancer treatment, which is really quite heartening. There's a lot more hope, and there are hundreds of drugs that are currently going through that process of being tested and tried to see if we can treat this disease better.
Right, right. So as you know, friends, he stays in UK. So fortunately, he was in Calcutta. His one of his family, in fact, his parents are in Calcutta. So I got hold of him, fortunately, and we got some time from him. So thank you, Via, once again for giving this very, very useful time to us. Now, I have tried to structure this discussion around cancer because so much we can talk. So I thought, let us give a structure to the discussion where first I want to talk about the entire, not business, but the entire ecosystem around cancer, how it works globally, if you can share any number, where we are right now. And obviously you just initiated something that how the process of drug discovery is happening in cancer. And also I want to know about the basics of cancer, because as a layman, we don't know. I mean, we just know that some cell is getting damaged somewhere. But which part of your body can develop cancer is also something which we don't understand. So maybe we can do basics first and the industry discussion later, or maybe whatever is comfortable with you.
I think from an audience point of view, if we start about the scale of the problem, and then we can talk about the biology and then move forwards from that.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important for us to understand the scale of the problem of cancer, and how we are likely to see it change over the next few years globally. So there was a time when cancer was thought of as a Western disease, where infectious diseases were the dominant cause of death within India, and these were Western diseases where infectious diseases were less of an issue. But what has happened is that with development globally, and in particularly in India, and we're seeing the fast pace of change, what are known globally in the healthcare field as non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, have become important just as much in India as in the rest of the world. And within NCDs, the sort of important diseases that we often focus on are heart disease, stroke, and cancer, and diabetes. These four are probably the dominant non-communicable diseases globally that are the most important causes of death. So within that, we need to think about where cancer sits. So in the West, cancer has now become effectively the number one cause of death. So cancer is about over 100 plus diseases, really, if we think about where the cancer started. So we think about cancers as cancers that have started in the lung, or they've started in the breast, or they've started in the colon, or they've started in the prostate. And they're all cancers. They all behave differently. But if we group them all together, as cancer, then in the West, so in the UK, it's responsible for 1 in 3 deaths.
Wow.
So 1 in 3 people are dying of it, and 1 in 2 people in their lifetime will get a cancer.
Oh my God, that number is huge.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's shocking. And what we're seeing is that as countries are developing, the patterns of disease are starting to mirror those that we see in the West. So what is estimated is that, more people will die in what are currently considered developing countries from these diseases than they will in the West. And even today, for some cancers, such as mouth and throat cancer, India probably has the highest number of cases compared to other parts of the world. So, and we'll come to that in a second. Within the Indian context, depending on the statistics that we look at, cancer probably ranks as somewhere between the 2nd and the 4th commonest cause of death in India even today. And what we will likely see is that ranking will rise with time. And that'll probably rise with time because we'll control respiratory diseases like chest infections and asthma and what is known as COPD and TB better, then the ranking of cancer will go up. Similarly, as we control heart disease better, the ranking of cancer will go up. And that leads us on to one other thing that you were asking about, is what causes cancer. And part of the reason the rates of cancer are going up globally is because the population is aging. Yeah, we're living longer. And one of the biggest risk factors for cancer is living longer.
Oh.
And so even though we are controlling cancer better, we're treating cancer better, the rates of cancer keep going up because the rate of aging is faster than the rate of these treatments. So I think if we don't do anything in terms of prevention, then the expectation is that one day cancer will probably become, like in the West, the commonest cause of death within India. And I think what we need to do is, hopefully through your channel and through public education, see if we can educate people to change that trend.
Yeah. So, I'm actually quite perplexed with this number. UK number is so high. So, so a developed nation will have a higher probability of having cancer? Is it a lifestyle related thing?
Very good question, Vivek. So what happens in a developed country is, as our healthcare system develops, our society develops, our risk of dying from other causes, like infection in childhood, of accidents when we are young adults. So we know road traffic accidents is a big problem, violence is a big problem. All of these things go down. And as they go down, we live to be older. And as we live to get older, because we will all die of something, then it becomes a competition between causes of death. And so as we treat one disease like heart disease, and we live that little bit longer, then another disease catches up. I sometimes say to my trainees that if I were in your shoes today, I would probably be looking at training in neurological diseases. Because, I hope in my lifetime we're able to find really good treatments for cancer, so it becomes less of a problem. But then the question is, what will get us after that? But I think that's a topic for another discussion.
That I think needs a separate discussion, because neurological disease is again the most emerging one, thanks to social media, thanks to everything what is happening around us, is there? So, what's your estimate? What's the average age, universal average age of a cancer patient? Because it's an old age disease, so should I presume that it's more beyond 60?
So I think it really depends on which cancer we're talking about. So while there is a relationship between, as we get older, the risk of cancer goes up, it also depends on the type of cancer and the specific cause of that cancer. So I think let's talk then about, what are the top cancers within India? What their causes are and how they cause cancer. Do you think that would be useful?
That I think is the most relevant question.
So in India, I think, within the limitations of statistics, the commoner cancers within men are things like mouth cancer, or oral cancer, lung cancer, cancers of the gullet, of the stomach, of the colon. Within women, common cancers are breast cancer, cancers of the mouth again, cervical cancer, lung cancer, colon cancer. Now, the relative rankings of these are very variable. But the theme that emerges within India is that probably the commonest cause of preventable cancer within India is tobacco. Whether it's in the form of smoking or in the form of chewing tobacco, whether it's the use of betel nut and pan, and we know all of these can contribute towards cancer. Globally, in a westernized society, we estimate about 50% of cancers are potentially preventable. Okay? 50% of cancers are lifestyle related. Another 10% is probably genetic. And another 40% is a bit of a mixed. We often think of it as polygenic, but, or we can call it bad luck. Yeah.
Okay.
But 50% of cancers in Western society is preventable through a number of lifestyle effects.
Okay.
In India, that number is probably higher. It's probably, some estimates are as much as 3/4, where tobacco is the leading cause of that cancer effect. Other causes of cancer apart from tobacco are alcohol. Viruses can play a role, and now with COVID, we've become a lot more familiar with viruses.
Yeah.
But there's a particular type of virus called HPV, human papilloma virus. There are lots of different types of it, but there are a few types of it that can cause more cancer than others. And they're responsible for things like cervical cancer. And there's a large burden of cervical cancer within India. Okay. And that's due to this virus that gets transmitted during sexual intercourse, and can also cause other cancers, and it can cause mouth cancer as well.
Okay.
And so there is a real scope for preventing this cancer. In fact, a few years ago, there was a trial done led by the Tata Memorial in Mumbai, which made global headlines it was a trial of trying to prevent cancer from developing.
Okay.
And in a lot of westernized countries, there's a screening program called the Pap smear, but it's very labor intensive, and it requires women to have the test, come back for the results, then maybe have some treatment, etc., which for the poorer people in our society is not really practical.
True.
And so they did a very pragmatic study where they said, look, why don't we do the definitive test on day one? And if we see something, we'll just deal with it. And so it was like a one-stop approach. And they showed a massive benefit of doing that. But of course, that is once the cancer process has started. These days, there have been vaccines that have been developed against this virus.
Okay.
And increasingly, they're being rolled out. And the aim is to vaccinate girls initially, but in the future to include boys as well. And this is happening in the Western world, before they start becoming sexually active. And that will prevent them catching this virus and getting this cancer.
But that is that specific virus-led cancer.
Exactly.
There are a lot of other cancers which are, you can't define why they happen.
Exactly.
Can we go more basic on this, that we use this word cancer very casually, right? So ultimately, the family of all the cancer diseases, the root is the same, the concept of your cell getting bad or kaput. Is that the definition?
Very good question, Vivek. So I think it's really important for us to understand what cancer is. Yeah. So the way we think medically about cancer is that it's a process where our normal body, the cells in our normal body behave badly. So I think the best way to think about it is the cells in our body all work together in a cooperative way. Yeah, that's how we function.
Right.
Okay. So you can think of it as our body is a society of cells that are living harmoniously. Each is doing a specialist task. Our heart is pumping blood, our lungs are providing us with oxygen, our liver is cleaning up our toxins, our kidneys are getting rid of things, our digestive system. But the question is, what happens if some of those cells in our body decide to become selfish? Okay, and that's how I think about cancer. Yeah, is that society then develops some rogue players who decide that I don't care about the rest of the body. I only care about my own survival. Now, we sometimes see that in lumps and bumps that we develop. Okay? So those cells have decided that they will grow and get bigger and multiply more than is actually needed by the whole body. Yeah? And these lumps and bumps we will often get, but they're not necessarily cancerous. Yeah? Because what they are doing is they are growing, but they're staying where they should be. And we often call those tumors or lumps benign.
Okay.
The medical definition of cancer is when those cells decide that they're going to grow and multiply beyond what the body needs, but more importantly, move to another place where they shouldn't be.
Okay.
Okay. So the commonest sort of cancers we have are cancers of the linings of our body. Yeah. So on the outside of our body, we've got our skin, which is our lining.
Right.
But if we look inside our mouth, we have a lining, which is a mucous membrane. And that lines the whole digestive tract.
Right.
Similarly, in our lungs, we've got a lining.
Right.
Yeah. And that acts as a barrier between the outside and the inside.
True.
Now, all of these cells that form the lining have at the bottom of them, if you can think of it as a layer of cement or a layer of soil or a platform that they sit on. And we refer to them technically as the basement membrane. Okay? And the definition of cancer is if a cell that's on one side, of that basement membrane, that epithelial cell, decides to break that boundary.
Okay.
So if it grows through that boundary called the basement membrane, it is then entering a space it should not.
Okay.
It's invading that tissue around it. And when it invades, it causes damage. And it is that damaging process that is the real problem with cancer. I sometimes say to my trainees that, there are only two problems with cancer. One, that it spreads, and the two, that it becomes resistant to our treatments.
Okay.
What do I mean by that? So the cancer cell, as we just said, is something that's become abnormal, and is behaving in a way that it shouldn't do by invading other tissues. Now, if we take the example of somebody with a lump in the breast that's become cancerous, if that cancer did not spread to other parts of the body, then it is potentially curable simply by an operation. And if it never spread, we would always be able to operate on it. But the reason operations don't work sometimes with cancer is because even when we have operated, the cancer has given off some seedlings, some stray cells that have gone either in the bloodstream or the lymphatic stream and already created places elsewhere in the body. So removing just that lump does not solve the problem for a lot of people. And we'll come to the treatments in a second. So the next question is, what has caused that cell to behave abnormally? And these days we know that that's because there are certain genes within that cancer cell that have gone wrong.
Okay.
We estimate that there are approximately 20,000 genes in each cell in our body.
And how many cells do we have inside our body?
I don't know the number for that, but we have quite a lot.
Okay.
So each cell in our body has the full instructions, full instructions in our DNA to make the whole body. But you can think of it as an instruction manual, how to run the whole organism. But each cell chooses to read only certain chapters of that manual, and it only reads the manual in the bits that it's supposed to. Now, what happens in a cancer cell is that process has got corrupted. that cancer cell decides it's going to read different chapters it shouldn't.
Oh, got it. Great analogy. I'm sure your trainees must be really learning from you.
Well, I
You
hope
have
so.
this natural, way of teaching and explaining things so properly.
That's very kind of you. So the question is, what then causes the cell to read the wrong bits? Okay. And we think that's because certain genes get mutated. What does that mean? It means that if we take that book analogy, right, at that start of that book, there is a contents page, right? And on that contents page, let's say there is a marking telling the cell which chapters it should read or not read.
Okay.
Let's say there's a tick and a cross indicating what it should do.
Right.
Now imagine there's a process that causes a tick to become a cross or a cross to become a tick. And now that cancer cell or that cell will behave differently.
Correct.
Abnormally. Now most of the time that happens, it will cause garbage. And that cell will die. Because it's now reading nonsense. It's reading the wrong set of instructions in the wrong context, and most of the time it'll cause that cell to die. But every so often, those ticks will happen in a sequence and in a set of chapters that will cause that cell to become cancerous.
Got it.
And that explains why not everybody who smokes a cigarette gets cancer.
Got it. And some people do say that, there's an ex-guy who has lived till 95 years and he was drinking every day, nothing happened to him.
Yeah.
So it's actually, there is no clear-cut formula which we can say that if you drink so much or you smoke so much, you will get cancer.
You're right. But we need to think about it in a little bit more sophisticated way.
Okay.
And we're getting that information coming through, okay? Because that's a puzzling question, right?
Yeah.
So what we know is there's a competition between processes happening. So let's think about what this changing a tick to a cross and a cross to a tick means in terms of biology. So our DNA, in a very simple way, is simply a book where everything is written in simply 4 alphabets.
Okay.
Yeah? A, G, C, and T.
Okay.
Yeah? Just these 4 letters make up our whole DNA. Okay? I couldn't tell you the answer of how many cells in the body, but I can tell you how many letters there are in the DNA.
Okay.
So there's 3 billion letters. Okay? Just 3 billion letters make up the whole human body.
Okay.
Okay? Now, when we say a tick has become a cross or a cross has become a tick, what we're talking about is often a simple spelling mistake.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Where there should be an A, it's become a G. Where it's a T, it's become a C. And when that spelling mistake happens, it changes the shape of the proteins or the amino acids that it gets converted into. And that means our proteins work in a different way, and that means the cell becomes cancerous. So Vivek, we were talking about, these spelling mistakes.
Yeah.
So the question is, what causes these spelling mistakes?
Yeah.
Now, one of the things in medicine and in biology we've often struggled with is bizarrely why we don't have more cancers.
Okay.
Why do I say that? Because as we're growing, we need to make more cells. To go from a child of 5 kilograms to an adult of 60, 70 kilograms, there's a massive increase in the number of cells in our body.
Right.
The cells themselves are not getting bigger and plumper. The number of cells are generally increasing. So each time we copy our DNA, 3 billion letters, there's going to be a risk of a mistake, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be a copying error. And we estimate that there are probably one mistake per billion, right? So as we make copies, every time you divide a cell, you're probably making 3 mistakes. And that will, if there's no other process, will carry on accumulating. But the body is very clever, okay? Evolution is very clever. And through a process of evolution, there are checks that happen so that the accuracy of copying is extremely high. And this constant correction of the spelling mistakes is what stops us from getting cancer.
Okay.
Now, that leads us to the answer to the question you were asking, is why don't certain people get cancer even though they smoke?
Yeah.
And for them, the answer is it's a competition between the rate of causing damage and the rate of correcting that damage.
Okay.
Okay.
Interesting.
So if you smoke, you're causing toxins to damage your DNA.
Right.
And your body is trying to fight that by repairing the DNA. And so there was an interesting paper a couple of years ago showing, and I don't want to encourage smoking in any shape or form because, we should all, it's the most globally avoidable way of decreasing the rates of cancer, and we should all stop smoking if we are. That there may be certain periods in your life where the risk of smoking is less than at others. Okay. So when we are younger, maybe we can get away with that on cigarette because our body can repair much faster.
Yeah.
But as we get older, that process changes. So it accumulates the DNA damage, and that leads to cancer.
Great. So can we extend this discussion to various stages? So we know that there's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So is that discussion anywhere related with these stages also?
So I think there is a lot of confusion about stages of cancer. And I'm glad you brought that up. So what I thought we could do is talk about how we've talked about how we define cancer, but how we speak of cancer. Because I think there's some confusion about that as well. And I think what will be really useful for people to be aware of is how doctors think about this. So doctors think about cancer based on where the cancer started. And the reason for that is even though we use the word cancer, it's 100+ different diseases that behave in different ways. They respond to treatment in different ways, and different treatments are better for different cancers. So it's not one simple thing. And that causes a bit of confusion. Okay? I tell you why. So if somebody has lung cancer, then we are talking about somebody whose cancer started in the lung. But that cancer that started in the lung may frequently spread to other parts of the lung.
Okay.
It might spread to the liver. It might spread to the bones, and it might spread to the brain.
Okay.
These are common places for lung cancer to spread. Now, it's really important to realize that the cells in the liver, the bone, the brain, all came from the lung.
Right.
And so they'll behave like the original lung cancer to some extent.
Okay.
And we think of these as lung cancer in the liver, in the bone, in the brain.
Yeah.
And it's really important to emphasize this because quite often there is some confusion where somebody has cancer of the lung that spread to the liver or the bone, and people will often say, oh, he's developed liver cancer as well, and he's developed a bone cancer as well.
Okay.
And I think we need to separate those things out because that means something quite different to saying that somebody has lung cancer that spread to different places.
Okay.
So that's concept number 1. And that links to this question of stage. So these days, as cancer increases, we occasionally do see people who've got both lung cancer and liver cancer, let's say. Yeah?
Okay.
But if they've got cancer just in the lung and just in the liver, that will be treated very differently
Okay.
from somebody who has lung cancer that has spread to the liver.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk about how we describe this technically. And the way we describe the spread of cancer is by using something called the staging system.
Okay.
Right? And so for pretty much all cancers, we use a 4-step staging process.
Okay.
And that's basically 1, 2, 3, and 4, Vivek. But it's really important to understand that what is 1, 2, and 3 is very different for different cancers. Okay? And why do we stage the cancer? The reason doctors stage the cancer is to get a sense of how much the cancer has spread.
Okay.
Because that tells us how the cancer is likely to behave. What is the chances that the cancer has given off these seedlings that we talked about of cancer cells that are hiding in other parts of the body?
Right.
So for stage 1, 2, and 3, it's a little bit technical for the general public to understand what they mean. But broadly speaking, in stage 1, 2, and 3, we're often talking about cancer that is in or around the area where it started.
Okay.
And stage 4 cancer, which, most people understand, is where the cancer has spread far away from where the cancer started.
Right.
So in the case of that lung cancer example, if that cancer in the lung has moved to the liver, then that's become stage 4 cancer.
Okay.
But if the cancer is purely in the lung and it's purely in the liver, then it wouldn't be considered stage 4 cancer because they're two different cancers.
Right. Right.
And that's a really important concept for, I think, people to understand, because that often causes confusion when they're communicating with people.
I mean, normal people, they don't understand the difference between lung cancer and liver cancer. And what you said was quite a revelation for me, that every cell of an organ is unique. So if a cancer spreads from one organ to the other organ, the cancer still remains the same. So how does medical science identify that this cell is a liver cell or this cell is a lung cell? It is easily identifiable. There is an address given to every cell.
So I think there are two questions here.
Yeah.
One is a very good biological question, and let me address that because actually it's interesting. So one of the questions is, as we are growing from one cell in a mother's womb to a whole adult, how do all of these cells that are reading different chapters from the book know where to go?
Yeah.
And that's the whole field of embryology, and it's fascinating. And it absolutely relies on an address system. So our body has an address system.
Nice.
So that it knows at any one time where it is. And that's why things are able to orientate themselves. And that's something slightly different to what we're talking about when we're talking about the cancer cell and whether we can identify it. We don't need to look at the address in that situation.
Okay.
From a patient's point of view, the practical question we have is, can we see the cancer cell in another place?
Okay.
And this is a challenge. And this is a challenge. And I think it's an important concept for us to talk about. So we talked about knowing how your cancer is going to behave, how aggressive it is, by knowing the stage, how far it has already spread. Now, like you said, that can be a challenge. Let me give you an example. So for normal CT scans, we have conventionally said to reliably detect a cancer on a CT scan, and again, it depends partly on which part of the body and which scanners, and the technology is improving, so things are getting smaller. But traditionally, we used to say that about a centimeter cube of cancer is generally the smallest size at which you can pick it up on a CT scan.
Okay.
A centimeter cube of cancer is approximately 1 billion cancer cells.
Oh my God.
Okay, so 1 billion cancer cells is roughly what we can detect.
So that's why it gets undetected for a long period of time.
Exactly.
Till you have 1 billion cancer cells together, then only you can find out whether cancer is there or not.
Yeah. Now that's looking at CT scans. Obviously, we can pick things up sooner for cervical cancer and other cancers where we're looking at it and using different technology. But if we're thinking about it in terms of somebody diagnosed with cancer and we want to know how far the cancer has spread, we have certain limitations with technology that are showing us a few billion cells or a few million cells. But we haven't quite got to a level with scans where we're picking up a few hundred or a few thousand cells. Because ultimately, it only takes one cancer cell to have escaped somewhere to then cause the cancer to come back.
Unbelievable.
And this is important. This is really important. While this is fascinating in technical aspects, it's a real practical problem, because I find the biggest challenge of cancer for our patients is uncertainty. The uncertainty of, is the cancer going to come back or not? And that is directly related to our ability to detect the cancer on whether it has spread or not, or whether there are any cancer cells left behind.
True.
And so what we need is better technology to be able to detect that. Because when I say to a patient that they have stage 1 or stage 2 cancer, I'm saying that, look, there is a 90% chance that there is no cell hiding somewhere else. If I say to somebody with colon cancer, they have stage 3 cancer, I'm saying there is roughly 65% chance that after their operation, there are no cancer cells hiding elsewhere.
But there is could be only one cancer cell.
Exactly.
So how can we calculate the probability also?
So the probability we can calculate by looking at our history of treating patients.
Okay.
So we will often, for example, somebody with colon cancer, we will do an operation. We'll remove the cancer in the colon if the scans don't show any spread. Then we'll look under the microscope to see if any lymph glands are involved. And we know that if the lymph glands are involved, then there's a 2 out of 3 chance that the patient has been cured, but there's a 1 out of 3 chance that even though the scans look clear and everything looks okay and the operation's gone well, that there's a 1 out of 3 chance that there are some small cancer cells that have escaped, that are hiding somewhere else, that our current technology cannot pick up, but that over the next few years will grow and cause the cancer to come back. And, so I don't leave your audience with no hope, but there is real excitement today in the cancer field, because we're starting to use a new technology called circulating tumor DNA.
Okay.
What is it? So cancer cells, while they seem very aggressive and they grow, etc., will also be dying. Okay? Just naturally dying, because they will often grow faster than the blood supply can keep up.
Okay.
And for various other reasons. So what often happens is, as the cancer cell dies, it releases the DNA within it into our bloodstream.
Okay.
And that DNA floats around in small little bits. And that DNA can be picked up these days using a blood test.
Wow.
And if we see that DNA has the signature of the spelling mistakes, then we can have a good idea that this DNA must have come from a cancer cell.
Yeah.
And if, for example, we knew the signature of the spelling mistakes in the cancer that was removed at operation and we can match it up, then we get even more confidence. And using that technology, the amount of cancer cells that need to be left behind for us to pick up whether there are these seedlings has gone up significantly.
But the carrier of these cells will be blood always?
What do you mean?
So as you said, I mean, blood tests.
I see.
Yeah.
Yes. No. I think what you're asking, I misunderstood your question. So the way to think about it is from a patient's point of view. What we want is for all our patients to be able to have the simplest possible test.
Yeah.
Yeah, that causes the least amount of discomfort, the least amount of pain, the least need to repeat the test, and the least risk of harm to give us an answer. Now, CT scans have two problems. One, as we said, you need about 1 billion cells to be able to see if there's any cancer cells left behind.
True.
So you're not picking up the seedlings that you really want to do. The second is we expose our patients to lots of radiation.
Yeah.
Whereas if we do a blood test, then yes, it's uncomfortable, it's painful, but there is no radiation exposure.
Right.
There's no long-term harm done.
Right.
Second, if that blood test can pick up these cancer cells, the DNA of the cancer cells, from anywhere in the body, then that's a very useful way of doing it.
Yeah.
Rather than doing a biopsy of different parts of the body, you're getting one way of getting an average of what the whole body is doing.
So my question was that only, that typically these cancer cells, they will transport from one organ to the other organ through blood?
That is a very common way of cancer to travel.
Okay.
But there are other ways. So there is also something like our blood system called the lymphatic system. Okay. So the way to think about our lymphatic system is the blood circulates and it feeds our cells.
Right.
So what happens is that the blood is flowing through at a reasonable pressure.
Yeah.
And at some point, you also want the cells to get some nutrients and things that can only be carried if there are holes in the blood vessels. Okay. So there are small little holes in our blood vessels that allow some of the fluid to ooze out. Okay. And the best way to visualize it is, when we cut ourselves, right? Initially, it'll bleed. Right?
Yeah.
Once the bleeding stops, what you will see is that there is like a yellowish clear fluid that will still accumulate and it forms a little crust.
Yeah.
That is basically our serum, our plasma, okay? Which is the fluid in which the blood cells are being carried around.
Okay.
So that will ooze out. Now, it oozes out okay because of the pressure.
Yeah.
But now the body needs a way of collecting it back. Because if we don't collect it back, then we'll get swelling.
Yeah.
We'll get swelling in our legs, we'll get swelling in our arms, but commonly in our legs because of gravity.
Yeah.
So we then have another system called the lymphatic system that allows this fluid to come back into our circulation.
Right.
And basically is a network of vessels, tiny little tubes, right, that collect all of this fluid. Now, there's an interesting thing. Because this fluid will be collected from under our skin and from different places, there's a higher risk of there being infection in it, right? So if I cut ourselves, some bacteria might go in, and et cetera, et cetera. Because this is a low pressure system, what the body does is it creates filters, okay? So these are little, what we call lymph nodes, right? And lymph nodes are nothing more than collections of blood, these lymphatic vessels with lots of white blood cells.
Okay.
And what the purpose of this is to take that fluid and filter it, so that bacteria and things don't get past and get into the bloodstream. And the white blood cells are there to kill those bacteria and things. Now, that's relevant to us from a cancer point of view, because the cancer cells can also utilize this system. So sometimes what will happen is the cancer cells will go directly into the bloodstream and float around and then get to the lungs and various other places. But a lot of people will be aware that we often talk about the lymph nodes being involved in cancer. And the way the cancer cells gets to the lymph node is through this lymphatic system. The lymphatic system connects to our blood system on the left side of our neck, and the tubes connect. The vessels connect. And so things can get from our lymphatic system to our blood system and then spread again through the body.
It's amazing. What a machinery it is, huh?
It is. The human body is amazing, both when it functions well, but also, it's amazing how things can go wrong. And I think our challenge is, how do we deal with it?
Yeah. So this is, a very good technical discussion on the subject. Now I want to go away from technical and more talk about the emotion part, which typically overrules. So once you get an information that you have a cancer or your family member has a cancer, how to go about it? Because that time your mind will stop functioning, literally. You will probably say that, whatever doctor is saying, just keep on doing it, keep on doing it. Can we do a checklist kind of a thing that first do this, then do this, then do this? I know giving a universal checklist for all category of cancer will be kind of difficult, but can we still make an attempt that to-dos when you know that there is a cancer?
I think that's a very good question. Cancer is very emotive. And it's emotive partly because of the seriousness of the problem, but also some of the myths and beliefs that have accumulated over the years about cancer. On a light-hearted note, because we're going to talk about a very serious topic, I often say to my trainees, a good way of thinking about how cancer has really changed is to look at what's happening in Hollywood. And I tell them about a movie I watched in the mid-90s with Julia Roberts. It was called Dying Young. It had Julia Roberts, whose boyfriend in that movie develops a form of cancer. And the stereotype is there of the boyfriend being very weak, having lost his hair, and vomiting in the toilet. And then I say to them, but look what's happened, because you come to the late 2005 onwards, and you have a series called Breaking Bad that wins lots of awards and is very popular. But in that, the main character is diagnosed with lung cancer and seems to be functioning okay. If anything, he's going around shooting people. And, while I'm making light of it, I think there's a serious point here. The serious point is, I think it's really important to be aware that the treatment of cancer has changed incredibly in the last 20, 30 years in a positive way. We're not there yet, but I think it's moved in a positive way. And the reason I want to start this conversation with that positive message is because I think that is part of the reason the conversation is often so challenging. We have an assumption, unfortunately, that if somebody's diagnosed with cancer, then that's terminal. Thankfully, that's not the case, right? In the West, we're approaching a situation where 2 out of 3 people with cancer are cured. That's not good enough, we want to get to 100%.
Mm-hmm.
We're making slow progress, but we're making steady progress.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in 1971, Richard Nixon in America declared the war on cancer.
Okay.
I sometimes laugh about it because he made the declaration on the 23rd of December 1971, on the day I was born. So I think I was destined to be an oncologist.
Amazing.
But at that time, you know, we were looking at less than 50% cure from cancer. Yeah? And gradually we've improved. And over 50 years, if we've gone 25%, we're making a 0.5% improvement in the cure rate of cancer per year, but without the volatility of the stock market, which you know more than I do. So we are making progress, and I think that progress is accelerating. So I think the first thing I suggest to people is when they are being confronted with the diagnosis of cancer is not to lose hope. I think that's really important. Because we don't know often at that initial stage of what the stage of the cancer is, what type of cancer it is, how treatable is it. And I think these are pretty sophisticated conversations. So that's number one. Don't lose hope, okay? Number two, ensure that all the information is available.
Okay.
What do I mean by that? Because of some of our concerns and worries about cancer, there is naturally a feeling that we need to act very quickly.
Right.
We create, as a result, a sense of emergency and panic, which may not really exist.
Right.
And that can often lead us, into more emotional stress, and two, potentially to take a course of action which may not necessarily be the right one in the long term. So for most cancers, barring a few exceptions, waiting a few weeks to get all the answers before starting on treatment is entirely acceptable.
Okay.
And is unlikely to change somebody's stage of cancer. If the cancer has spread, it is unlikely to have changed within a few weeks.
All right.
Similarly, if it's not spread, it's not going to spread necessarily in the next few weeks. So, point number two, make sure we get all the information.
Okay.
Now, what all that information means is slightly different in different cancers.
Yeah.
But as a basic, people need a biopsy to be sure of what type of cancer they have.
Okay.
Scans can tell us if somebody is likely to have a cancer. But the treatment of that cancer is going to depend to a large extent on what it looks like under the microscope. Okay? Because there are different flavors of cancer. And that information you won't get without a biopsy.
Okay.
So a scan is important, a biopsy is important. And these days, a third thing is becoming important. As we learn more and more about the genes that go wrong, that cause the cancer, the spelling mistakes, they are becoming important in telling us, A, how the cancer is going to behave, but B, on what drugs we can use to treat that cancer.
All right.
So one of the terms that is becoming very popular in medicine, quite rightly so, is the concept of personalized medicine.
Okay.
What do we mean by that? What we mean by that is giving a person the treatment that is precisely matched to their cancer's DNA or biology and the person's biology. And we're starting to see examples of that emerging, and that's where all that excitement is. with drugs that are working remarkably well. And we often refer to them as targeted drugs. And chemotherapy is starting to become, it's still really important, it's still the mainstay of cancer treatment, but it's starting to become the older model of treatment. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that a bit more.
Right. So well defined. With 2 stages, right? The third when it comes to treatment.
So, in terms of the treatment itself, there are different modalities of treatment that we think about when it comes to cancer. So, we have 3 main modalities of treatment. One is surgery, where what we're looking to do is operate and remove the cancer. Generally speaking, with the aim of cure. And that is usually appropriate when the cancer hasn't spread to other parts of the body. Because if it's spread to other parts of the body, then removing the cancer itself will often not be helpful because you're leaving cancer behind.
Yeah, when you say removing the cancer means removing that organ which is affected by the cancer?
Precisely. Or part of that organ. So for example, in breast cancer, we don't have to remove the whole breast, right? We can remove part of the breast in some women if the cancer is small. But if the cancer is big, then we might remove the whole breast. Right?
Got it.
In terms of the lung, we will try removing the whole lung. We'll try removing only part of the lung because we want to preserve as much function as possible. But we need to do an operation that will ensure that we've removed enough of that organ to minimize the risk of leaving seedlings behind or having cancer on the edges of the operation. So surgery is often very useful, in fact, one of the most useful ways of curing cancer, but it's particularly useful when the cancer hasn't spread too far. Now, we'll often also use a second modality called radiotherapy. Now, there are a lot of variations in radiotherapy. Let's talk about the general principle of radiotherapy, and then we'll talk about the various types just in general terms. So radiotherapy is simply no different from X-rays. So we all have had X-rays, but these are basically higher energy X-rays that will go in like an X-ray and damage the DNA. But the idea here is to cause so much damage that instruction book that the cancer cell has is so damaged that it chooses to die rather than cause more problems. So that's what the principle of radiation is. You give enough rays, damage the cell enough so that it cannot function and it dies.
So chemotherapy is also the same, right? It kills the cells, right?
Absolutely. So there are some real parallels between radiotherapy and chemotherapy in the sense that they're often targeting DNA. But they're targeting DNA in different ways. In the case of radiotherapy, these high energy photons, so just from our school level physics, you remember we talked about light as waves, and then we talked of light as particles, right? And those particles were photons, right? So you can think of them as cannonballs, right? Little bullets, right? So you're firing these bullets of photons of X-rays, and some are going to miss the DNA, some are going to hit the DNA, and the ones that hit the DNA will cause damage, the DNA will break, and then the cancer cell will die. Chemotherapy works in a slightly different way. It's not firing these cannonballs that are physically with energy breaking the DNA, but they're often causing chemical damage to the DNA. And then triggering the same process in some ways. So we'll come to that in a second. So that's radiotherapy. Now, the difference between radiotherapy and surgery is that in surgery, you're removing the organ itself.
Right.
In radiotherapy, you're not removing the organ. Sometimes we use radiotherapy on its own for some cancers. For other cancers, we use it alongside surgery. So let me give you an example. So for example, in breast cancer, in a woman who's got a smallish cancer, who would prefer not to have her whole breast removed, and that's, really important, then she can have a smaller operation called a lumpectomy to remove the cancer, but without removing the breast.
Okay.
But compared to what's called mastectomy, where the whole breast is removed, the risk of some stray cancer cells being left behind in that area is a little bit higher.
Right.
Because you have not removed the whole breast. So in those cases, what we'll do is, following lumpectomy, we'll give radiation to that area to try and kill off any stray cells that might be left behind.
Got it.
So that's an example where we use the two things side by side.
Got it.
There are other cancers like cervical cancer where we use them either or. So what we find is, in cervical cancer, if the cancer is very early, then an operation will have a high chance of cure.
Yep.
And no radiotherapy is needed. And if the operation is successful, then that's all that the woman needs.
Right.
But if the cancer is a little bit more advanced, and by that I mean it's a large cancer, or it's infiltrating into the tissues on either side of the cervix, then there's a higher chance that an operation will leave cancer cells behind. And in these women, what we'll often do is we'll just give radiotherapy at a very high dose.
Okay.
And because the radiotherapy is going to treat a general area, it's able to treat those gray zones, if you like, much more effectively.
Right.
And that can also cure people's cancer.
Okay.
Now, the third modality of treatment is what we are often thinking of as chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And chemotherapy these days has a very specific meaning. And I'm going to try and explain that for your audience.
Yeah.
So the term doctors are starting to use and oncologists are starting to use is the term systemic anti-cancer therapy.
Okay.
We often abbreviate it to SACT.
Okay.
Why have we changed the terminology?
Yeah.
The reason we have changed the terminology is, in the old days, we were generally using a class of drugs, chemicals, that were designed to damage DNA in different ways.
Okay.
And they acquired the term chemotherapy when chemotherapy simply means chemical treatment. So in some ways, antibiotics are chemotherapy, but we don't use that word.
Okay.
We've started to use just through habit the term chemotherapy to mean DNA damaging type drugs used for cancer.
Okay.
Although there are other drugs that work on things like microtubules and things like that, but they're all designed to kill the cancer cell, and often designed to kill the cancer cell, exploiting the idea that a cancer cell needs to replicate DNA, then divide and make new cells. And that was the key concept behind which we were targeting cancer starting in the late 40s, 1940s. That's when we started getting the first chemotherapy drugs. Okay. So it's not really been that long that we've been doing that. But what's happened since the 90s, the late 90s, is we've started being a little bit cleverer about our strategies to treat cancer.
Okay.
And how did that happen? It happened because we started learning more precisely about the genes that go wrong in cancer. We started to go from a black box of one of these 20,000 genes has gone wrong to starting to define which of those 20,000 genes are going wrong.
Okay.
And these days, there's a consensus that there are about 1,500 genes out of that 22,000 that, if they go wrong, will cause cancer.
Okay.
And there's some debate on how many of those genes need to go wrong to cause cancer? What's the minimum number? Is it 3? Is it 5? And it's probably somewhere along there, right? That's the minimum number that would be needed. But probably most cancer cells have much more than that. But how many of them are absolutely critical is something that's up for debate at the moment.
Okay.
But if we know now which gene has gone wrong, and we often think about the genes that have gone wrong as driver genes and passenger genes. Okay. What do I mean by that? You've got lots of spelling mistakes, right? Yeah. Some of those spelling mistakes won't have any effect, right? It won't change the meaning of the word or the sentence. But others will be really critical, right? And those critical genes that are causing the problem and were the starting problem are often mistakes that the cancer cell is addicted to. Okay. What do I mean by that? So there is one good example. There's a gene called HER2. If you want to read about it, there's a very nice book called HER2. It was made into a Hollywood movie as well. And there's a very famous scientist based in California at UCLA called Dennis Slayman. And he found there was a gene called HER2, and there were extra copies of this gene in about a quarter of women with breast cancer.
Okay.
And what he found, that if he could find these extra copies of HER2 in somebody's breast cancer, then they did badly.
Okay.
Their cancer was more aggressive.
Okay.
And that led us, even today, to a reclassification of breast cancer as one disease into at least 3 different diseases.
Oh.
Okay. So this is why I was saying to you, look under the microscope, but sometimes you need to do molecular tests to try and work out what type of cancer somebody really has. So in breast cancer, we think about what are called hormone receptor positive breast cancer. We think about triple negative breast cancer, and we think about HER2 positive breast cancer.
Oh.
So what is HER2? HER2 is a protein that's on the outer surface, on the membrane of the cancer cell. And what this does is it gives signals to the inside of the cancer cell, asking it to grow and be more aggressive.
My God.
Okay. And that makes it more aggressive. And so what then happened, and this is again a fascinating story, we don't have time to go into it, but it led to the development of an antibody, okay, designed to bind that HER2 protein on the cancer cell surface and stop it working. And that led to a drug called Herceptin in the late 90s, which completely changed the outlook of women with HER2 positive breast cancer. And this antibody is not damaging the DNA.
Okay.
It's simply stopping this protein from working. It's turning off the signal. Okay.
I always get fascinated by this concept where a particular drug goes to a particular organ which is having some problem and treats that organ. How is that possible? It's not a software, right? Like you said that this drug will go to that particular section of breast cancer and treat it, not allow that to multiply. How does the science work?
So what you're talking about is essentially the terminology we use in cancer. So chemotherapy, we think of as non-targeted treatment, right?
Okay.
Because it goes around and there are other cells apart from cancer cells that are also dividing.
Yeah.
Our hair is dividing. The lining of our mouth and our gut is dividing. Yeah. Our blood cells are dividing. And normal chemotherapy will also damage these cells.
Right.
Because they're also dividing, and the process is to target the dividing cells. And that's why you get the typical side effects.
Yeah.
Hair loss, diarrhea, sickness, infection, immune system effects. And that is a problem of targeting. How do you get the drug to work more against the cancer cell and less against the normal body?
Right.
And in medicine, there is a concept called therapeutic index. What is the ratio of the damage to a normal cell to the damage of the cell you want to have an effect on?
Right.
So drugs like paracetamol and blood pressure medicines have a very good therapeutic index.
Right.
That's why you can get a standard dose to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
The problem with cancer drugs is that therapeutic index is less.
Okay.
It's not zero, but it's less. And that means that the dosing and the monitoring and the side effects are more of an issue.
Okay.
And in cancer medicine, what we're trying to do is improve that therapeutic index. How do we get to a point where actually it's going to be a bit like treating diabetes or blood pressure? You give everybody a standard tablet, you don't have to worry about side effects, and you can get on. And so this journey with HER2 is an example of that.
Yeah.
So it's saying, okay, can we target this protein HER2 to treat breast cancer? Now, one of the things that was good was that thankfully HER2 is not present in lots of parts of our body. Because if this HER2 protein was there in lots and lots of bits of our body, and it was equally important, then we couldn't use this antibody to treat it.
Got it. Got it.
But because it's only present in selected parts of our body, then that's useful.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do these days is we're trying to say is, look, why don't we target the spelling mistakes? Because the normal cells shouldn't have the spelling mistake.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But the cancer cell will have the spelling mistake.
True.
So if we make a drug that works only against the spelling mistake, then it will have an effect mainly on the cancer cell and less on the normal cell.
So right now there is no such drug which is there.
No, there are.
There are? Okay.
And so for the last 25 years, the biggest investment from academia and pharma has been in developing this class of drugs that are focused on doing that. So melanoma is a good example. Melanoma is not a disease that's very common in India. It's basically a form of skin cancer. From exposure to the sun, which is common in the West. And in that, there's a gene that goes wrong called BRAF, B-R-A-F. There's a specific mutation that happens called V600E, and there are drugs that will stop that protein from working when it has that mutation. So that's the real area of excitement, and that's leading to this change in the naming from chemotherapy to SACT. And within that SACT area, we have lots of different types of drugs. So we've talked about antibodies, but there are also tablet type of drugs that are blocking these specific spelling mistakes.
Okay, interesting. So can I presume that there cannot be standardization of treatment in every patient in terms of in cancer? Every patient will have a unique treatment because there is a combination of medicine required based on the cancer.
Yeah, I think personalization is a concept that is becoming more and more important in medicine in general, not just cancer. In cancer, perhaps more so than other areas, but I think this is going to start affecting everything. And this touches on a concept that is becoming very important in medicine called pharmacogenetics. What do we mean by that? Pharmacogenetics refers to the idea that everybody reacts to a drug in a different way. We all know of people who cannot take medicine A but can take medicine B, whereas somebody else has no problem with medicine A but has a problem with medicine B. Why? The answer to that is that our bodies metabolize, break down drugs in slightly different ways. Our bodies, our livers are efficient at breaking down one drug more than another drug, and that might be different between you and me. Another fascinating area that is emerging is that this concept of how our body handles a drug is determined not just by your and my DNA. but is also influenced by the bacteria in our gut.
Okay.
So it's not just our biology that matters.
Right.
It's the biology of that garden of bacteria that we have in our gut that might also influence how well we do and not do.
Wow. Wow.
Okay? And that is really important. We have developed an idea that germs are bad.
Yeah.
And that may be relevant over the last 200 years where there was lots of infections and all of that. But what we are now discovering, and in some ways we should have suspected it all along,
Yeah.
is that through evolution, we have developed a partnership with what we call germs. Okay? We don't live as isolated human beings.
Right.
You know, there's the spiritual idea that we're all interconnected. Biologically is very true.
Right.
So as human beings, and as all animal and plant species, we're surrounded by bacteria, viruses, plants, animals, etc. And in biology, there's a concept which is generally categorized into 3 parts, which describes the relationship between one organism and another.
Okay.
One is called parasitic, and we're all very familiar with this, right? Organism 1 tries to take advantage of organism 2 to grow and succeed. Okay, the lion eats the deer. The snake eats a mouse. That's a parasitic relationship. There's another relationship which is called a commensal relationship, where we sort of tolerate each other. You know, we live side by side, and we don't harm each other. A third relationship is called a symbiotic relationship.
Okay.
And you can think of it as an evolution of a commensal relationship. And this is where you sit side by side for so long that you start saying, actually, you know what? Why don't you do this for me and I'll do this for you? Okay. A good example is bees and flowers. Okay. If we got rid of bees in the world, the flowers would die. If we got rid of the flowers, the bees would die. And they have a relationship. The flower says, I'll make you some food in the form of nectar. In return, you take the pollen from one flower to another flower, and you do the transport function for me, and I'll do the food function for you. That's a symbiotic relationship. Now, we've been slow to recognize this relationship with germs in our own bodies. And now what we're recognizing is that actually, in somebody who's about 70 kilograms, right, 3 kilograms of their body weight is actually germs.
What are you saying?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And because the germs are smaller, okay, because the germs are smaller per kilo, right, there are more germs per kilo than there are human cells per kilo. Now, again, I forget the numbers and I can look this up for you. But if you were to count the number of germs versus count the number of human cells, there are more germs than human cells. So in some ways, we're more germ than we are human.
So you should stop using the term germ in a negative connotation now.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And so now the term we're using is microbiome.
Microbiome.
Okay? And we should think of our body as a garden where we're cultivating the right bacteria. We're cultivating the right microbes rather than just focusing on antibiotics to kill them and fight them and all of that.
Amazing.
And that's where lifestyle comes in.
And obviously, role of medical fraternity also, because what we get communicated from them is what we start believing. And we have been always told that germs is bad, wash your hands because you want to kill the germs. What to do?
Well, I think this is about sophistication. I'm sure, with being in finance, when people come to you, you try and assess that person's maturity in terms of financial literacy before you give them advice.
True.
And you know that if somebody's not very financial literate, you'll have to give them very simple black and white suggestions and instructions.
True.
As the literacy level goes up, the complexity of the products you would discuss with them will go up.
Correct.
And I think we're at that stage.
Right.
This concept of the microbiome is recent. It's only over the last 25 years that this shift is occurring. Now, we went into this in terms of personalization. So I'll give you another example, and this is relevant to cancer. So in the context of cancer, one of the most exciting developments recently is been using our own immune system to attack our own cancers.
Okay.
And this has been really successful in certain cancers. Melanoma was one skin cancer that I mentioned, but it's also been successful in treating colon cancer, where for a specific type of colon cancer, we seem to be controlling cancer that people would have died from in a few years, and they're now living for 5 years or more. And it turns out in melanoma, depending on people's gut bacteria, might actually affect how well they respond to this drug. Okay? So that might be important from a cancer treatment point of view. But this is early days, and I don't want people to go off and have fads and say, right, I'm going to take a probiotic to do this, because probiotics may end up actually doing the wrong thing. Because it turns out that in the garden, the more different plants we have, the better it is for us than to have one winner plant.
True. So food plays a very important role on the treatment side?
So I think from a treatment side, the impact of food is more debatable. And I think the issue of food is complex when somebody's having treatment. I think the role of food in preventing cancer is perhaps much more relevant.
Okay.
So what we're finding is in the West that obesity is playing an increasing role in causing cancer.
Yeah.
And as we all know, processed foods have a big role to play in obesity.
Yeah.
So I think, in India, we're lucky, I would say, in some ways, because we have the opportunity to learn from the West.
Yeah.
We're moving in that direction, but we can see what the effect of that lifestyle trajectory will be. And so we can potentially do a course correction before we are too far along that path. And what worries me a little bit is, having lived abroad for many years, is that the consumption of tobacco, alcohol, meat is going down in the West. Whereas in India, I'm seeing the opposite trajectory. And I hope what will happen is people will see that actually a course correction is happening there, and we will correct it before it becomes too much of a problem.
Yeah. I mean, that's why all the wise stocks listed in Indian stock market, they're always expensive. They're going up because that's the domain where the growth is clearly visible in India. So as you said, I mean, there's obviously limitation of time and I can get what I can get from you, but I want to talk about this final aspect of cancer, which is, when doctor says, and we see in movies also that ab kuch nahi ho sakta hai, like the finally doctor gives up that we can't do anything about it now. We just have to wait for the inevitable thing to happen. That phase of life for someone who is suffering or for the family, what would you recommend? What should be the mental state at that phase?
I think that is the most challenging part of cancer. So we think about cancer treatment in 3 phases. There is what we call the curative phase, where the cancer, we've caught it early and we're trying to cure the person. There's a risk that things might come back. There are no guarantees, but we're hopeful that we can cure it. There is a second phase, and I'm just bringing it in so that we're clear on terminology, so that if people are looking it up and all of that, we're clear. There's a second phase, which we called palliative. And I'll come back to it. And then there's a third phase, which we will often think about as the terminal phase.
Yeah.
The terminal phase is generally described as that sort of period in the last 3 or 4 months of somebody's life, where further active treatment to try and control the cancer is not the right thing to do.
Right.
And that stands separate from what we call the palliative phase. Okay, so we have the curative phase, we have the terminal phase, but there's a phase in the middle called the palliative phase, and I really want to emphasize this for your audience. The palliative phase means that what we're trying to do is control the cancer as best as we can for as long as we can while maintaining quality of life.
Okay.
And this is a really important point, because there is a sense out there that as doctors, our focus is on extending life, but without a consideration for quality of life. But an oncologist will be very clear with you that that extension is really of value if it comes with quality.
Right.
And these days when we do trials in cancer, we're always trying to measure quality of life, to say, did I maintain quality of life? Because if I didn't, giving somebody an extra few weeks or a few months may not be the right balance.
True.
So I would like people to be aware that that is just as important to the oncologist as it is to the patient, because to the patient, that is in some ways the most important thing.
Right. So quality versus quantity. How many years you want to live with what kind of quality of life?
Exactly. So the types of treatments we use in cancer are the ones that we feel comfortable will give quality. If it's not giving more time, which is quality time, then by and large, it never gets to market. Right. We say, well, that's not the right thing to do.
Right.
I wouldn't treat my family member that way, so why would I treat another patient? Now, there does come a time where the current drugs stop working for a lot of people, especially when the cancer has spread elsewhere. And that comes to that second problem I told you about with cancer, that the cancer changes. So not only is there a spelling mistake in the cancer that causes it to be the cancer, that spelling mistake is constantly occurring. So what we find is that somebody will start off responding to a drug. But because in the background, the cancer cells that are left behind, that haven't been killed off by the drug as yet, have developed new spelling mistakes. Which now allow it to bypass this drug.
Yeah.
And we call that problem drug resistance. And that means that at some point, a different drug will be needed.
Yeah.
And so forth. Now, what we're trying to do is develop better drugs so that that doesn't happen. Yeah. And to do that, we sometimes need to combine different drugs so that the chances of the cell becoming resistant to 2 drugs at the same time is less than 1 drug. And so that's the challenge of palliative care. Now, coming back to your question of what do we do in the terminal phase, I think that's always emotionally hard. It's emotionally hard for everybody. But if we have done things right during the palliative phase, it can make things easier during the terminal phase. What do I mean by that? I think as human beings, we're surprisingly emotionally resilient. But our ability to adapt to a situation takes time. But given time, we can do it. So when I see a patient, for me, it's really important that I am honest with them and I give them the level of information that they want and they need. Why? Because what, as doctors, we need to do is to build a level of trust with our patients so that they feel safe. And if they feel safe and comfortable, then we are able to have more honest conversations with them. And if we have more honest conversations with them, then we can put realistic expectations on what we might expect. And if I've done that correctly during a patient's journey, then when the time comes where our drugs are no longer working, then it is something that doesn't come as a shock.
Correct. It's all about how mentally you are prepared for something. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
true. That's true.
And I think one of the things we need to think about in this is, when we're giving somebody treatment and we're giving somebody, trying to give them more time, from a patient's point of view, what are we really doing? My feeling is that what we're doing is giving that patient, that person, the opportunity to do certain things that they want to do. But with the difference that they now have a sense that there is a clock ticking. But the key is giving them the opportunity to do the things they want to do. And so I often will say to my patients, this is the treatment regimen. This is when we're going to do things. But I need you to tell me if there are certain things that you need to do. Is your son getting married? Is your granddaughter graduating? Are there things that you want to function? Is there a holiday you want to go to?
Right.
And then what we'll do is we'll try and build their treatment schedule around that so that they can live their lives. And it's not common, but every so often I'll have a patient who will be talking about that terminal phase and saying, I'm sorry, our drugs are just not good enough.
Yeah.
And the patient will turn around to me and say, Dr. Agarwal, I wouldn't wish this on anybody. But in a strange way, some good things came out of this. It meant I did some things that I'd always wanted to do, but I had always put it off. And I think, when people have come to that place where they feel that they have done the things they wanted to do, there aren't things left, then especially the older patients, I'm not talking about the young patients, I'm talking about the older patients, they'll often come to a point where they say, look, I've had a good life. And I've had this period of time where the cancer has been controlled and I've been able to do the things that I want to do. And when we are able to do that, it's very satisfying because it's much more easier for the patient. I won't say it's easy in the easy sense, but easier because emotionally they're in a better place.
True. Lovely. This is really, really opened up my mind, and I think all my learners here, they will get so much perspective. I think Indian society will have a lot of acceptability of this disease. People will start talking about it more often, and these sessions, and I will urge more content creators to please record more videos on this disease. Because the more we know, the more will probably that last phase of acceptance will become much faster and much smoother for everyone.
Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
equally, as an oncologist, I hope we get to a point where we're curing more cancers, so we'll have to have less of those conversations.
We always hope to do that, but as you said, that this is a very complex machinery. So, which part is having some problem and which can emerge in future? So, we all will be busy for sure. Thank you, Roshan Bhaiya. Thank you for giving such an amazing time. I think we spent almost 2 hours together. I didn't realize that we have
It's
recorded
flown,
this.
isn't it?
But I think I love this long form content because this really gets me an opportunity to get the best out of you.
No,
Thank you.
Thank
you, Roshan Bhaiya, for giving your time. Thank you. All right, dosto. So I hope you liked this. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I need to watch it again because there were a lot of conceptual discussions. I need to go back, watch the video, Google karna padega, and probably I'll make a note so that I'm more conceptually clear about this concept. As I said, there's someone in my family who's going through this. So I thought this is an important concept which needs to be discussed with everyone. So I hope you liked it. And in case you want me to record such videos, अगर आप चाहते हैं कि ऐसे और content बने, तो आप comment में लिखिएगा किस topic पे आप चाहते हैं content बने. तो I can figure out someone I know, or maybe you can tag a person जो आपको लगता हो कि जिससे बात करनी चाहिए. We'll try to contact them or him or her and get useful knowledge for all of you. Thank you for watching this video and thank you for staying till the end. See you soon. Bye.